Hello, everybody, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Wednesday, the 3rd of July. Today, I'd like to talk about a symbol and how powerful a symbol can be when it is used appropriately and when it is used inappropriately. Yesterday, the day after our Canada Day celebrations, where flags were flown and fireworks went off into the wee hours of the morning, the day after that, Rob and I were out at Humpty's, which is where we often go for breakfast together before work, having our coffee, when all of a sudden Rob's attention was drawn by somebody who just drove in the parking lot. I looked over because he looked very put out, and flying in the back of this gentleman's, I use the word loosely, in the back of his pickup truck was a Canadian flag flying upside down. Now, if you are in the military, or if you are a salesperson, like a sailor, you'll know that an upside down flag indicates distress. Something has happened, something you need help. And that's a common sign. To fly your flag upside down means it's something, you need someone to come to your assistance. Well, during COVID and the trucker convoy to Ottawa and the border issues that we had a couple of years ago, it became a normal thing to see these trucks flying their flags upside down, and also to see flags and signs created that had the F word and then Trudeau, who is our Prime Minister. And instead of the U in the F word, they put a red maple leaf, which is a big part of the Canadian flag. The imagery was unmistakable. I was concerned because of what that was showing the world, but also our children. That is not really a word, although many people would argue with me that it's just a part of our vocabulary these days. But it's not really a word that we let our children use in school. We wouldn't let them use the F word to their teachers. We wouldn't say it to our doctor, things like that. So to see it running around the streets right out there, but also with Trudeau's name. Forget the disrespect to the Prime Minister. He had children. He has children. And those children were seeing that every day, and that was their name. And that's inappropriate. But then also there were flags like that. And a neighbor of ours in Wainwright used to fly one until his neighbor would go next door and say, please take that down. And then he would. And then eventually he'd put it back up again. The cycle would repeat. But for someone to fly you can fly that flag. You can fly an Edmonton Oilers flag or Montreal Canadiens flag, Winnipeg Jets flag, whatever you want. I think it's inappropriate to fly that one in particular. But to take a Canadian flag and fly it upside down is something completely different. Now in Canada, we don't have the same thoughts about our flags. We don't have the same worries about flag burnings and things like that. But we do have a considerable pride in our flag. And to see people flying the flag upside down is a sign of complete and utter disrespect. It is not being shown as a call of dismay or asking people because they're in distress. It really isn't. Their distress is not distress because they are doing something about it, something completely inappropriate. When someone flies their flag upside down like that, especially when you're sitting across from a serving member of the Canadian Armed Forces who has put his life at stake, has deployed, has served in the military for many years, and dons the uniform with the flag on his shoulder every day, knowing that at any time, if his country asks of him that he give his life for that flag, he would do so, not because he wanted to, but because that is his job. That is what he's committed himself to represent and to protect every single citizen of Canada, including the citizens who fly that flag upside down. I understand that lots of people don't like the current Prime Minister. I understand that I didn't always like the Prime Minister of the time. I did not run out and try to hurt him. I did not write letters to people saying that he was all kinds of expletives. I did not get on rant and raves on Facebook or someplace else and say that he should die or that he should be eliminated or anything like that. I simply worked in society trying to do the job that I thought I could do as a citizen, and then voted for a different person that sometimes was elected in, and sometimes I had to put up with some prime minister that I really didn't approve of his party, and yet I worked within that. And up until now, it has seemed like that's been a process that has worked. That together Canadians can work, we can work together to figure out the best way to serve, the best way to seek the best for all people. And yet, in the last few years, I don't know whether it was coming before and I was just ignorant of it, but after COVID, during and after COVID, it seems that we have become a society that is no longer polite. We no longer wish to work together for a common good. We no longer consider things to be of the importance that they once were, like our flag. Our flag came into being, I believe, in 1967, prior to me being born, and that was the 100th anniversary, I believe, 100th anniversary definitely, of Canada becoming a nation, and I believe the flag was officially adopted in 1967. And it was a reminder to us that we are a sovereign nation, that we have the ability and the right to elect our government, to determine what happens in our country by the very political nature that we have created. And we have created a system in which people are elected. It's very different than the American system. We do not elect a prime minister, we elect a party. And when we do so, we focus a lot more on what things that party stands for than we do on the person. For instance, in the American election coming up, there's a lot of focus on each of the two candidates for president and what they believe and what they can do. Our prime minister does not have the sweeping authorities that an elected president of the United States has. Our prime minister must work within a party system in which his party works with him to put into place whatever rules or laws that are created, whichever things that are passed that they believe and are supported by the rest of the government. And that's why it's so important that we have a majority government or a coalition of a minority government working with another party, that together they may negotiate and work out what will happen for the Canadian people. I find this to be a very helpful way. It means that we don't end up with a dictator. Although there are people who would have you believe that we have one. We do not. We have a prime minister who was relatively young when he was elected. We have a prime minister who has worked hard to try to bring in equality and equity between men and women and different members of our society, which is not a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant society any longer. It hasn't been for a very, very long time. And yet there are many people who are very angry that we have people in our government making decisions who have a different color skin than they do. People who are angry that there are women in positions of power. Although within the Canadian system, those positions of power are limited because of the way we do our politics. We live in a society, in a world, in a country that allows people to have health care. If you go to a hospital, you will not be turned away because you don't have private health care. We have trouble finding doctors and all of those things that are normal in this day and age, but no one will be denied health care because they don't have insurance. If you cut your finger or put a nail through your hand, you can go to the emergency room and you will receive care. And it will be excellent care. It might take a while, but you do not get turned away from our hospitals because you don't have insurance. We have social services, and we recognize that not all people are able to take care of themselves at all times. And so, yes, indeed, we do pay taxes, and we need to. We have lots of problems that lots of countries around the world also have, but we also have systems in place that help us to work toward fixing those problems. When one of the gifts that we have is the Canadian Armed Forces, and every man and woman, every person who serves in the armed forces, who dons the uniform, gives up the right to sign a petition, to speak out against the government, because they need to serve the government and trust that the government will make the right decision on their behalf. And they will go into danger. They will go into our own communities when we have ice storms or floods, and they will work their fingers to the bone, not because we beg them to, not because we pay them all that well, but simply because that is the vow they have taken to king and country. We need to respect that, and we need to learn how to respect the people who make the decisions in our country. We have the right at any time to have an election called if there's a vote of non-confidence. And when that time comes, people can get out there and vote. They can determine who they would hope would be the right person. And they can live with the decision that is made, because in no more than 5 years, we will have another opportunity to vote, if not before. The point being, though, is that every person has the right to vote. And every person has the right to work with the person who is voted in and the party that is voted in to try to make this a better country. Flying a flag upside down, cursing out the prime minister, working against the government itself does no one any good, because at the end of the day, that person who flies his flag upside down still has the right to do so because of those people like our Canadian Armed Forces members who fight for their right to have those freedoms, as ridiculous as that might sound. And that person who decides that he doesn't want to pay taxes or he wants to rail against the prime minister, he still, if he hurts himself, if he shoots himself in the foot because of the gun he's toting around and doesn't have a permit for, or who's threatening lives with it, if he shoots himself through the foot because he's an idiot, he can still go to the hospital and receive treatment because he's a Canadian. We live in a beautiful country, and that's what we should be focusing on, working together and how we can fly our flag proudly, that we are a country that others can look at and say, might we be more like them? It seems lately that those people who want to misbehave, the people who are so angry about things they don't like, which things were their way before, need to get out and vote, not get out and threaten. Because when you fly your flag upside down, without it being a sign of distress, for many people, myself included, that's a threat. Because you are threatening the thing that I call home. You are telling me that you are not a safe person in this country. I can't trust that you would have my back as I would have yours as a fellow Canadian. Symbols mean a lot, and we need to be very careful about how we use them. We should be flying our flag properly, and when we struggle with it, we should be working together to discover ways that we can have conversations and we can ask our politicians to do a different thing, not demand that they be eliminated from politics, because that happens way too much. Social media, other ways. Let's stop that, Canadians. Let's be an example to our neighbors in the world, that there is a place in this world where people can have social services and healthcare, and they can have the freedom to vote, and the freedom to be educated, and the freedom to marry, and the freedom to do what they want with their bodies, simply because they are Canadians. Have a great day, everybody. God bless. I'll see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel.